No, your sister's a werewolf, and your mum. Hi guys, so a quick word of warning that there will be spoilers today, and though I don't have a Howling playlist at the moment for these reviews, I will create one imminently, I think. So last night I watched Howling 2, and definitely at this point already, if we started out at the very top of a very tall mountain with the excellent first film, we've now begun the process, I think, of slaloming our way down to the very pits of despair, which will no doubt greet us by the time we get to the 8th film, I'm guessing. To be honest, this film kind of, in terms of trying to match the quality of the first one, this film waves the white flag with its title alone, because, come on, Your Sister is a Werewolf, no horror film worth its salt is going to call itself that. This one takes a big left turn in terms of tone and style. It just feels so different from the original Howling. This is very much a horror comedy, although I might take that a little bit further and call it a horror sex comedy or something like that. Sex does seem to be very prevalent throughout all of this film. Watching this, it reminded me a lot actually of Prom Night 2, another sequel which really differed from its first one in terms of tone and feel. But I think Prom Night 2 was much more successful in that about turn than Howling 2. I'm a little bit saddened actually that there exists an Arrow Blu-ray for Howling 2 and not Prom Night 2, because in terms of doing a sequel and doing it vastly different from the first one, Prom Night 2 was much better at that. But anyway, so the story in this, we have a very tenuous link with the first one, because we open here with an open casket funeral of Karen White, who was played by Dee Wallace in the first movie. Sadly, Dee does not turn up to do a cameo here, which is a shame, because I think if she'd have come on set for 10 minutes, laid down in the coffin and just shut her eyes, I think it still would have ended up one of the better performances in this movie. But sadly, no Dee Wallace. So we get this morbid funeral to begin with, and it transpires that Karen had a brother who quickly embarks on a path of revenge in this film, although for some reason he doesn't go after the werewolves from the colony in the first one. He goes after a completely different pack who are sort of based in LA half the time, and I guess their main home is in Transylvania, which I think is in Romania, in Europe. He's joined on his hunt by his girlfriend and also Christopher Lee, so it's a little group of 3. Lee is playing an aging PI who specialises in werewolf attacks or something. We don't really get a lot on this character's background, and I can't even remember his name. Christopher Lee, it blows me away actually that he's in this movie. I read online that the reason he took this role was because he'd never done a werewolf film before, but I wonder if he regretted that after 5 minutes on set, because he is so far above this film, and yet his performance in this is not actually that strong. I kind of feel like he's very aware early on here that he's not in a film that's going to amount to much, and so his performance is a little bit subdued. He delivers his lines in a very deadpan kind of droll way in this, as if he's just treading water, just trying to get through it. I mean, he still offers a commanding presence most of the time, but let's just say it's Christopher Lee at 90%, and in the action sequences he's not really up to par, I feel, in this. I don't know how old he would have been around when this got made, around about 85. I guess he would have been, got to be late 50s, early 60s surely, but probably just heading into his kind of elderly gentleman sort of stage of his career, because if I think of The Man with the Golden Gun from the mid-70s, that would have been only 10 years before this film, and yet there was a bounciness and eagerness about him in The Man with the Golden Gun. He was still just about a young man in that film, but fast forward 10 years to the middle of the 80s, he just seems so much older. And whenever there's like an action sequence in this where there's like loads of werewolves running around, guns going off, you know, things happening, Lee looks almost a little bit bewildered, like he doesn't know where to turn in case his joints start creaking or hurting. But I'm still glad that he's in this film. I mean, God, take Christopher Lee out of this and it definitely gets a hell of a lot worse. The director is, I can't think of his name now. I think it might be Phillipe Mora, something like that. I did look at his filmography just before I did this video, but I didn't recognise any of the other films that he's done in his career, apart from Howling 3, which I've not seen. I'm a little bit distressed by the fact that the same director who did this film is going to be doing Howling 3 when I get to that one. I mean, At least it's not subtitled "Your cousin is a bloodhound" or something. It's just called Howling 3. I guess, you know, thank God for small mercies. Maybe somebody whispered in his ear after this film, look, you've got to dial down this comedy sex stuff and make a more serious horror film. If you do that, then we'll take you on. That's what I'm hoping, but I'm not holding my breath. Unlike the first film, this one has a very clearly defined villain in the form of Sherba, or should I say villainess. She's played by Sybil Danning, not somebody who I'm greatly familiar with. This character has no character, essentially. She's just mean and nasty and spends most of her life thinking about sex. She wears these massive black shades that look like maybe Sylvester Stallone gave them to her after he was done filming Cobra. To be honest, her entire pack is completely obsessed with sex. They spend most of this movie just screwing each other and occasionally feeding on some poor soul who just happens to wander into their web. There's one scene, for instance, where there's about 50 werewolves in this pack just having sex with each other in this, I wouldn't call it a small room, but they're all doing it in quite close proximity to each other. There's another scene where there's some kind of threesome going on between Sherba, her guy, and this other woman, but it's not remotely titillating because they're all covered in fur. They keep doing these weird, like, werewolf movements, like, ah, while they're actually doing it. I guess the point of this scene is to show us what it would be like to have sex as a werewolf, but I'm not sure that I particularly wanted to find out about this stuff. When I was watching this film the other night, my wife was sat just over there, and she does this thing on a night where she does these paintings. That's her hobby at the moment. And when I'm watching a film, she'll occasionally look up to see what's going on the screen. And a few times she looked up during this film, and she was just like, "What the hell are you watching?" And I was just like, "It's meant to be a werewolf film. I mean, what are you going to do, right?" But they definitely take the sex too far in this. Although there's one really funny sex moment in this. So the two good characters, Karen's brother and his girlfriend, come to think of it, Christopher Lee is basically the only person in this film who doesn't get laid. That's probably why he looks so grumpy during this. But anyway, these two characters, they're having sex in a hotel room, and outside a werewolf walks past and sniffs the air, and he can smell that two people are having sex through the walls of this hotel. So it suddenly makes him all excited and happy, and he just starts necking the person in front of him in the street. I thought that was a nice bit of humour, actually, that I did appreciate. So this movie is capable of being funny at times, but the sex stuff just goes too far, like the end credits. So this Sybil Danning, I'm guessing that she was more a model than an actress, because I didn't notice her getting her breasts out in this film, at least without the fur covering them, but they clearly filmed a shot where she whips off a top and the breasts come out. But they show this during the end credits, but they don't just show it once, they show it like 20 times, and I don't really know why. It's meant to be like a funny thing, but I didn't find it particularly funny. I mean, it's a nice shot, don't get me wrong, but I don't want to see it 20 times. If I want to watch it again, I can just rewind it, you know what I mean? Plus, it kind of ruins what's a really good theme song that they've got on the end credits. But why the breast shot? It really kind of brings down the overall class of this movie. Not that it had much of that to begin with. I mean, can you imagine watching Friday the 13th Part 6, and when it gets to the end song with the man behind the mask, suddenly we get, what's that woman's name? Jennifer Cook, who plays the main girl in that. If suddenly you could just see her getting her breasts out while Alice Cooper's doing his song, it would kind of reduce the impact of that song, I think. The shame of it is the soundtrack in The Howling 2 is actually one of its positives. There are some good things about this movie, and the music is definitely one of them. There's a real 80s feel to the music in this that I kind of liked. So there was a band called Babel who formed just for this movie, and they do a concert scene early on where they sing this song called The Howling, which was especially written for this movie, and I really liked it. It's quite catchy. I like the performance of the lead, the front man, I guess. But this song is repeated several times throughout the film, and it got to the point where I was like, they're really over-egging it with this song, aren't they? I mean, I know it's a good song, but seriously, we've heard it a few times now during this film. It reminded me of this 80s action film called The Delta Force, which I think came out a year after this. In that, there was like a theme song that was just repeated so many times while Chuck Norris was doing his thing, and it just became a little bit of a running joke by the end of the film. this film, Howling 2, does the same thing with its main theme song. It's just lucky, I guess, that it is actually a very good song, because in the end I kind of liked it that the song kept popping up. So that was kind of a cool thing. And also, there's another good thing that I liked in this film, the editing. So the director does try and do something interesting with this material. So what he does is, at times, he'll be showing a scene and then he'll put in like an insert shot of something that happened earlier on, but it's like he's trying to remind us, the audience, of one little moment or thought that a character had earlier on. Now, you see this sometimes in movies and you probably won't think much of it, but in this film, it's a constant. It happens quite a lot, almost as constant as the music, but clearly it was an intended style of this film, but it actually works pretty well, although it did start to gnaw on me a little bit in the second half of the film. For example, there's one moment earlier on where, in a scene, we suddenly see an insert shot of Karen in the coffin from earlier, and it's kind of creepy to suddenly see this before our eyes because we think we've already gone past this. That's one example. A funnier example. So there's a scene where I was talking about the big werewolf orgy. Suddenly during that, we see the band Babel playing their song The Howling, and I thought to myself, oh, wait a minute, Sherba's brought the band from LA all the way over to Transylvania to play this song in the same room as all this werewolf sex is going on. I thought, that's brilliant, that's hilarious, but how can this band even put in a performance while all that stuff's going on in front of their eyes? But then I realised that actually no, the band haven't been transported to Romania. We're just seeing an insert shot of their performance from earlier. Like, the director's just started to throw it in there to make this werewolf sex, give it a bit more of an MTV kind of feel, I guess. He's trying to make it be more than just about the sex, if you see what I mean. But I like the fact that he's at least tried to do some neat stuff with the editing. Like I said, there are some good things about this movie, and we've got the music, the editing. You know, it's not, I don't want to give off the impression that it's a terrible movie. You can laugh at it and take the piss out of it, but it's not terrible. It's just significantly down on the excellent first one. I can't let this review wind down without mentioning the elephant in the room, or should I say the ape in the room, because if you've watched this film, you will undoubtedly be aware that most of the werewolves bear an uncanny resemblance to apes or gorillas. And the reason for that is because, okay, so this film shot in the Czech Republic, although I guess it would have been Czechoslovakia back in the mid-80s. But anyway, they ordered a batch of werewolf costumes to be delivered to the set in time for filming, but there was a cock-up with the order and a bunch of ape costumes turned up, and there was no time to order another batch, and they couldn't delay the filming, so they had to just go ahead and pretend that these ape-looking people were actually werewolves. But there's no getting away from what you're watching in this film. I mean, if it looks like an ape and it smells like an ape and it tastes like an ape, then it's an ape, and it's just a little bit silly. I can't believe that in the first Howling film we get some of the best werewolf practical effects of all time, and in the second one we get some of the worst practical effects of all time, to the point where it genuinely looks like we're watching apes running around pretending to be werewolves. I mean, they were fully aware of the problems they had trying to get away with this. They've even put in a line of dialogue early on in this film where Christopher Lee tries to explain that in this universe, when werewolves are undergoing a transformation, they briefly go through a little phase where they look like an ape before reaching full werewolf maturity. It's complete bullshit, but at least it's something. I didn't even notice that line of dialogue, to be honest. I only found out about it later on when I was reading about the film online. Can you imagine if in Planet of the Apes this same thing had happened but in reverse, and you would have had Charlton Heston strung up in a tree just looking down going, "Get your paws off me, you stinking I mean ape." It just doesn't even bear thinking about. I will finish on a positive though and say that some of the kills in this movie are quite entertaining. There's a really good sequence in a warehouse early on where some punks get killed, which I quite liked. But my favourite kill is of the dwarf character. So he's running away from the main werewolf camp with some earbuds in, so they can't get him with their supersonic screaming attack thing that they do. But quite randomly his earbuds fall out, so then he's vulnerable, and the sonic blast or whatever it is, it messes his face up and causes his eyeballs to pop out. I thought that was a cool little effect. And then he rises up as a kind of demonic dwarf, And this leads to probably my second favourite kill in the movie, where that same dwarf gets thrown out of a window and lands on something sharp. I can't remember another film where my two favourite kills have probably been of the same character, but it's just another odd little thing about this movie. But anyway, let's get on and show you the version of the film that I've got for this. Here is my copy of Howling 2. It does not have Your Sister is a Werewolf on the front of this. I guess they wanted to make it look a little bit more respectable when it's sat on the shelf of HMV, or maybe. It was done by Arrow though, so you're guaranteed good quality. There's a number of good features on this, including 2 commentary tracks. When I think of all the great films I've got on my shelf that have no commentary tracks, this one has, excuse me, this one has 2. It's got one by Phillipe Mora, where I guess he tries to explain himself. And the other commentary track is by composer Steve Parsons and editor Charles Bornstein. I'm pretty sure that Steve Parsons is actually the frontman you see of the band in this film. So that commentary track's probably quite good. Well, both of them probably are. I think it'd be quite interesting to have Mora complain about all the things that he was up against in this. And there's also a bunch of interviews, one with Sybil Danning, actually. That could be quite interesting. And some behind-the-scenes footage, alternative opening, alternative ending, trailer, gallery. You know, it's packed with features, as you would expect from an Arrow release. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this weird and wacky film. So we've got 1, 2, 2.5 out of 5. That's my average score. I mean, on the one hand, you could say that this is a terrible film, but on the other hand, it's really entertaining. I could definitely see myself watching this again if I'm just in the mood, or maybe I've come back from a night out, I just want to watch something silly. Maybe I've got a friend over, or my brother maybe, and I want to watch something that, you know, me and someone else can have a real laugh with. It's possible I could watch this film again, certainly, but the quality is lacking in several aspects to do with this movie. I think 2.5 feels right. It just kind of splitting it down the middle kind of a thing, but it's certainly way down on the first film, which I think I gave 4.5 out of 5. It'd be interesting to see how good or bad Howling 3 is. I'm looking forward to trying that, and I will do that very, very soon and do a review for it as well. So I'll leave it there for today. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.